This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China condemns the decision by the U.S. to shut down its consulate in Houston, Texas. Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan agreed to give dialogue a chance in resolving the long-standing Nile Dam dispute. And we tell you why operators in Kenya are against new restrictions on the sale of alcohol in bars and restaurants. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. And joining me in studio is Uche with the business headlines.
Thanks, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Kenya's Amina Mohamed seen as an early frontrunner to head the World Trade Organization. And prosecutors in Italy want former executives of Shell and Eni jailed over a bribery scandal in Nigeria. Of course, that and more coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. And we begin in the Chinese capital. Beijing now calls Washington's move to shut down the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas, outrageous. The U.S. State Department says the reason behind the move is to protect American intellectual property and private information. But the Chinese Foreign Ministry says the real reason is politics.
On July the 21st, the U.S. abruptly asked China to close its consulate in Houston. This is the American political provocation against China and a serious breach of international law and the basic norms of international relations. It is also a grave violation of a bilateral consular agreement and deliberately undermines China-U.S. relations. China strongly condemns this outrageous and unjustified move. We urge the U.S. to reverse this incorrect decision immediately. Otherwise, China will definitely take necessary legitimate actions.
Beijing says the Houston consulate is still open and operating. It says Chinese embassies in the U.S. have reported receiving bomb and death threats linked to recent acts of discrimination against people of Asian descent in the U.S. Beijing has also called for Chinese students in the U.S. to be vigilant over arbitrary acts by U.S. law enforcement, such as interrogations, confiscation of personal belongings, and even detention. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper says he plans to visit China for talks on how to improve two-way communication as geopolitical tensions rise. The two countries have seen their relations sour in recent months over issues such as trade, Huawei and Hong Kong. Jasmine Sen has more.
The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo paid a visit to London on Monday. Top of the agenda was China.
The UK is really clear that we need to work with our American friends.
The Secretary of State's visit came after the UK overturned a decision to allow Chinese tech giant Huawei to play a limited role in building its 5G network. Despite pressure from Washington, France says it's sticking with the Chinese tech company. Its finance minister said the country would not ban Huawei investment. Washington has been steadily rising the tempo in its rivalry with Beijing. For the second time in as many weeks, 2 U.S. aircraft carriers were spotted in the South China Sea last week. China, however, saw it differently.
China has exercised maximum restraint in safeguarding its sovereignty and interests in the region. On the contrary, the U.S. refuses to join the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Beyond the South China Sea, other conflicts are simmering. TikTok, a Chinese social video app which is gaining traction in America, came under sharp scrutiny in a U.S. Senate subcommittee hearing Tuesday. Many political observers say the U.S. president's moves are aimed at winning over voters ahead of November election.
The Republican Party has issued a 57-page memo, a guide to Republican senators and Republican House members on how to win the elections, and the key is to blame China.
On Wednesday, China also asked the United States to stop making accusations about cybercrimes in response to the U.S. indictment of 2 Chinese nationals for allegedly hacking COVID data and defense secrets. With such divisions between the world's 2 biggest economies, it's difficult to see a resolution anytime soon. Jasmine Sen, CGTN.
Meanwhile, a former ambassador of South Africa to Japan and Spain has commented on Hong Kong's new national security law. While expressing optimism over China's future economic prospects, he says maintaining the rule of law and order is of vital importance to Hong Kong.
South Africa and Africa have sympathy. We have understanding. And we support China's position on Hong Kong. Because Africa, like China, we've been victims of colonialism. We've been victims of imperialism by the West. So Africa understands China's actions and China's position on Hong Kong. And we agree that the continued outside interference in the domestic affairs of China should stop. In fact, I can go further by to say that Africa and South Africa sees the national state security legislation as a further step in the decolonization of Hong Kong after years of colonial rule under Britain.
To Kenya now, which continues to struggle to control the spread of COVID-19. The government has issued new guidelines on the sale of alcohol in bars and restaurants. But many in the food and beverage industry are opposed to the new restrictions. CGTN's Robert Nagila spoke to one bar owner who asked us to protect his identity.
The streets fall silent in Nairobi as Kenya's daily curfew begins. Behind closed doors, a number of pubs are coming to life in breach of COVID-19 guidelines.
You are not supposed to open a bar. Bars are not opened.
Despite the warning, pubs and clubs have continued to operate under the government's radar. Over the past weekend, police arrested a senator in a bar in Nairobi past curfew hours. Ironically, he chaired a committee in the Senate overseeing the country's response to COVID-19. He was fined $150 and resigned from the committee. The government has now issued new guidelines banning the sale of alcohol in bars and restaurants. Only takeaways will be permitted and consumption must be in your home. At a bar in a low-income neighborhood in the capital, the owner tells me they operate past curfew hours. He says the local police and authorities are fully aware of his operations.
If they know that you're open, they will come, but they will not arrest you. They will share your day's earnings with you, and they stay silent. You remain with the rest, and that's how you survive.
Despite signs on social distancing guidelines displayed, a group of men without masks are seated together, eating roast meat and drinking. The bar owner says the situation is desperate.
If I shut the business today, how will I survive? It has reached to the point where you consider taking your life instead of waiting for COVID-19 to take it. You cannot keep telling your children that there's no food.
For now, his business remains open. For how long, he's not sure. He says his debts are piling up.
We need to...
President Uhuru Kenyatta is scheduled to meet county governors next week to review measures amidst a surge in COVID-19 cases. Bars and alcohol are likely to be on the agenda. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Meanwhile, a Kenyan doctor is calling for more support for medical workers as COVID-19 cases swell across the country. The lack of adequate testing kits as well as the closure of a number of testing centers in the country are said to be also of particular concern. Tuli Shabalala has that story.
Kenya continues to battle the COVID-19 pandemic and cases are steadily rising each day. Recently, the government ended a partial lockdown that was aimed at preventing the virus from spreading from cities to the countryside. Now, towns and villages are bracing themselves for a potential spike in the caseload, which means the hospitals will be in need of more medical supplies and protective gear.
Moving forward, and as the numbers swell, we will definitely need more and more support.
The Ministry of Health is reporting over 240 deaths from the virus. Currently, the funerals are overseen by health officials wearing personal protective equipment. The coffins are sprayed with disinfectant and only a few relatives are allowed to attend.
One thing why we are using them is that we don't want the community to come into contact with the COVID cases because we are preventing the transmission of the disease within the community.
As the virus spreads, there is growing concern that people infected may not ask for help until it's too late.
First of all, know how to fight stigma, know how to keep yourself safe, put on your mask.
The government is facing a crisis over a shortage of testing kits. Concerns have been raised about the length of time it now takes to release coronavirus test results. Added to this, local media has reported that the National Public Health Laboratory Services and the Kenya Medical Research Institute are no longer testing the public, a move that will affect many who rely on free screening. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Access to healthcare remains a challenge in Libya, especially during the coronavirus pandemic. The country has been under lockdown with daily social and economic activities on hold. But with new equipment and training, a medical center has reopened its doors, much to the relief of the people who need it the most. Scores of Libyans and at least 30,000 refugees are expected to benefit from its services. It is one of just 3 primary healthcare centers currently operating in the Gergaresh neighborhood of Tripoli. An estimated 500,000 people live in that area. The center is supported by the UN Refugee Agency and the International Rescue Committee. It had stopped operating at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
And that's what we're working here with this facility, to provide free of charge healthcare access for all, regardless of their background.
This is a very good thing, to find a place that is close by for someone to support themselves with this clinic and treatment.
As South Africa finds itself in the eye of the coronavirus storm, many cultural practices relating to burials have had to be shelved. The number of coronavirus cases in the country has quickly surpassed the 350,000 mark, with deaths resulting from COVID-19 exceeding 5,000. CGTN's Julie Shire has that story.
Lawrence Konyana's family-run funeral parlor is situated in Sebokeng Township in Gauteng Province, now the epicenter of South Africa's coronavirus outbreak. In more than 50 years of operations, he says he's never encountered this many funerals.
Around this time winter, we do get spikes anyway, we do get an increase, but we've seen a little bit more than usual, and we think this is associated to the COVID because we are getting a number of COVID cases as well as the suspected ones. We used to doing funerals on a Saturday. Now we're doing funerals almost every day.
COVID-19 has disrupted cultural practices associated with funerals. Many traditions are now prohibited.
We used to taking the body home the night before the funeral. And in terms of COVID cases, you cannot do that. And we also discourage them from washing the body prior to that, which is also difficult on certain families because they can't perform certain rituals that they needed to perform. As well, we used to maybe keeping the body for 5 days or so, and that now has changed because, as you know, in terms of the regulations, we have to bury within 3 days.
Gauteng accounts for most of the COVID-19 deaths in South Africa with over 1,000. The city of Johannesburg, however, says it's still small in comparison to the number of overall deaths.
We have almost 500 burials per week. And out of that 500, you'll find that 98 or 100 is COVID cases on a weekly basis. But then that does not mean COVID cases have increased more than your normal burials, because we've never had a situation where we have a row of graves specifically for COVID cases on any given day, week or month. We haven't been there yet.
These are all freshly dug and filled graves, a painful reminder of how many loved ones have been taken too soon by COVID-19. Grave sites have not yet been overrun by COVID-19 burials, but the city has identified 2 mass burial sites should the need arise.
When capacity available in the mortuaries cannot hold anymore. Then government takes over and all the bodies will be buried within 2 days at the instruction of government. Now, when that happens, we will get an instruction that says dig. Either you dig individual holes or you're going to dig trenches like in New York.
Authorities here are hoping that the COVID-19 storm dissipates before it runs out of grave space. But they say that all those who succumb to the illness will be treated with dignity. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. Time for us to take a quick break. Here's what's still ahead. Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan agreed to give dialogue a chance in resolving the long-standing Nile Dam dispute. And the splendor of the Samburu culture in Kenya and why spears are being abandoned for books.
My family has been doing this artwork for the past 600 years.
My dream is to be a leading player in Africa, in the spice sector.
Nobody in the region consumes it. Even me cannot afford the vanilla cooking.
What we've created here is the elegance, the color, the celebration of life.
Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan have agreed to give priority to efforts to reach a binding deal on the contentious Grand Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile. The three countries participated in a mini-African summit on Tuesday to continue settling disputes. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says his country will remain committed to a continued, equitable and reasonable utilization of the Nile waters without significantly harming Egypt and Sudan. Here's CGTN's Gurum Chala with more.
After the completion of the African Union brokered Grand Renaissance Dam talks, Ethiopia's government in a statement said a major common understanding has been reached, which paves the way for a breakthrough agreement. So, Ethiopia's government statement in addition said Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan agreed for further technical discussions on the filling of the GERD to continue in the African Union-led process and proceed to a comprehensive agreement. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed earlier in June said the continued negotiations between his country, Sudan and Egypt were not easy.
Since we started building the Renaissance Dam, the diplomatic work has this year been more challenging than it has ever been. The people who negotiate with us know very well what we are doing. Therefore, whenever we are hard at work, the diplomatic work gets tougher. When we joke, the diplomatic work in return gets simpler.
Ethiopia has already achieved its first-year targets for filling the dam. The government said the current rainfall and runoff situation in the region has helped boost water levels in the reservoir. Work at the dam continues while Ethiopia attempts to reach at an amicable agreement with Egypt and Sudan.
In this rainy season, the plan is to accumulate 4.9 billion cubic meters of water. This means 3 times the size of our Gibe Dam water holding capacity. After some time, we will build 35 meters, and when the dam's height reaches 595 meters, the Gard reservoir will hold about 18.4 billion cubic meters of water. This again is 3 times what we have already been holding by the dam. Then our last job will be building an additional 45 meters, which will increase the dam's height to 640 meters above sea level. Then we shall reach to the intended 74 billion cubic meters of water in the reservoir. That will be our final job.
Ethiopia now wants to sign an agreement that could guarantee a win-win principle-based terms on benefiting from the Nile waters. And without that, Addis Ababa says a deal that affects its long-term interests is no deal. Group Jara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Meanwhile, Egypt says it also wants a mutually beneficial outcome in talks over the filling and operation of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Adel Mahroui has this report from Cairo.
Egypt is insisting on a legally binding agreement over the filling and the operation of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. That should be followed by a comprehensive deal that includes the future use of the Nile water.
Since the beginning of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam crisis, Egypt wanted to reach a legally binding agreement on all aspects that could create harm on the upstream countries. It doesn't mind any developmental projects that could help Ethiopia, because we know that no nation will accept any country standing against its own development. Cairo wants it to be a win-win outcome. To reach that, however, we must first make sure that no harm could come from the dam.
Ethiopia's next filling phase for the dam should begin next year, which somewhat relaxes the negotiation schedule.
I expect tension to fade away. For the Ethiopian Prime Minister, filling the first phase, whether deliberately or by rain, is a great political victory domestically. Now there's plenty of time to negotiate until the next filling phase. Egypt will not try to work on how to reach an agreement before coming to the next filling phase. That would be a great waste of time.
During a mini-African summit on the dam dispute, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi underscored the need to achieve progress. El-Sisi stressed that the three nations need to work on enhancing cooperation and confidence building in order to resolve all hanging issues. The AU's mini-summit ended with an agreement to resume talks once again. It's maybe another year before Ethiopia begins the second filling of the reservoir. In these decade-long negotiations, a year is not much. This period must see changes in the stances of the three nations, or else the deadlock will last. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Ras Sidr, Egypt.
Still in North Africa, the Egyptian parliament has approved a possible military intervention in Libya's decade-long conflict. The decision has provoked mixed reactions. Egypt has defended this move by citing its readiness to safeguard its borders and national and regional security against any threats. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has that report.
Events have been set in motion in Egypt that could possibly lead to Egyptian armed forces being deployed to Libya. And this has sparked some concerns.
The intervention of the Egyptian state in Libyan affairs means more bloodshed among the Libyans and inciting to kill them. It is considered an invasion of the country and an attempt to control its fortune. I personally refuse carrying out of military operation by Egypt inside the country. This is direct attack against the legitimate government in the Libyan state.
The Libyan state has its own sovereignty. When you ask somebody to enter Libya, it is definitely a decision that we consider to be very wrong on all levels. You should protect your own borders as you fear the smuggling of weapons. But to let somebody intervene in Libya is a crime, and those responsible for it should be held accountable.
The continuing unrest in Libya risks sparking a confrontation among foreign powers that have been directly involved in the conflict. Fighters led by Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar have been battling the forces of the GNA, the internationally recognized government, overseen by Fayez al-Sarraj. Egypt says its involvement is paramount in ensuring its national security is not breached.
The decision issued by Parliament is in accordance with the letter issued by the National Defense Council, which talks about threats from the Western Front's borders with Libya, threats to Egypt's national security. It is related to the existence of terrorist and criminal militias that were brought in by the Turkish government to Libya. The existence to these militias threatens the Egyptian national security first and Libyan national security as well, according to the political leadership, with both inseparable.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has already warned that he would not sit idle if both Libya and Egypt were to be threatened. Sisi, alongside the United Arab Emirates and Russia, backs Haftar, who abandoned an offensive on the capital last month after Turkey stepped up support for the GNA authorities in Tripoli.
Our approval is a call for peace, not a call for war. The Egyptian forces will not intervene unless the existence of foreign powers continues in Libya, which crossed the red line, and that the president clarified, and that they continued the aggression against the Libyan people. This is when the Egyptian state will use its right to defend its national security first, and second, its right to support a neighboring Arab country and a member of the Arab League.
Egypt has vowed to defend its territory from so-called terrorist groups and militias. The Egyptian parliament approved the possible deployment of the country's troops on its western front. Some Libyans have expressed concern that this could result on a direct threat to the country's sovereignty. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
In Somalia, the government has been meeting to decide the electoral model the country will use in upcoming elections. If these discussions taking place in Galmudug state are successful, the planned one-person, one-vote election will be the first for Somalia in 50 years. President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo and his Prime Minister Hassan Ali Kaire have had side meetings with leaders from the regional member states. These regional heads say the country is not ready to hold such an election this year, citing insecurity and logistical challenges. But Somali citizens are hopeful for a fruitful outcome, despite differences among political leaders in the country.
In my opinion, the Dumareb meeting is a good gesture. I believe there will be a positive outcome once a meeting is held. You know what the outcome for the misunderstanding will be. The current leaders meeting in Dumareb, and any positive outcome, it will be long overdue. I am now pleased about it.
The meeting is a good sign. When a matter is discussed, the outcome is always good. If they will be mindful about the fate of their country, they will thoughtfully discuss the subject. In that sense, we are hopeful of a positive outcome then. If everyone contributes positively to the discussion, then the outcome will be good.
The United Nations Children's Fund says 1 in every 4 girls and 1 in every 7 boys in Nigeria are sexually molested before the age of 18. An NGO that runs programs aimed at preventing sexual abuse in rural communities has urged the Nigerian government to tackle the problem. Philly Haza reports from Abuja.
It's another day for Grace Jaffet to relive memories to her husband that stir anger and a cry for justice. Her recollections of the rape of her niece in October last year. Grace's niece was only 7 at the time and was raped by a man in this community of Barwa on the outskirts of Abuja.
She was on her way back from school when a man who lives next door lured her into his house and had his way with her. It's been a traumatic experience for her, so we had to send her back to her parents far away from here. Despite the fact that we are poor, we've spent so much money in court trying to get justice. But up till now, the case is still ongoing.
That incident has spurred Grace to help tackle sexual molestation in her community by joining hands with a non-governmental organization called Vaccine Network for Disease Control. The NGO runs sensitization campaigns targeting young girls in rural areas. It teaches them how to avoid rape, report any incident on time, and take their education and well-being more seriously. According to the Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development, more than 2 million women and girls in Nigeria are sexually assaulted each year. Many of the victims are in rural areas and most rape cases are not reported. As a result, President Muhammadu Buhari signed a law in 2015 that guarantees justice and protects the rights of victims of sexual and gender-based violence across the country.
Out of 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, only 14 have signed the anti-rape law. 23 others, mainly from the north, are yet to do so. In the month of June, the government declared a state of emergency on rape and sexual molestation across the country in a bid to tackle the issue.
However, experts say passing laws alone is not enough.
Beyond the law, I think what the government should do is to make sure there's implementation of the law. That's where the challenge is. There should be a synergy between the hospital, the police, and the community, and then to make sure that it gets to its logical conclusion. And that logical conclusion should be publicized so that you know for fact that when you do those things, you will be jailed.
The NGO also works closely with rural community leaders in identifying rape cases and tackling all forms of sexual abuse. Monday Kogi is the chief of Barawa community. He says the NGO has made a difference through its programs.
The issue of sexual molestation used to be a huge burden to me as a leader and even to the entire community. But since the NGO came in last year to help sensitize the people and enlighten us on how best to tackle the issue, the cases of rape have completely died down. I am now actively involved as well in the struggle for a rape-free community.
The hope is that efforts by the government and NGOs could bring relief to the likes of Grace, as well as hope to the many children facing the risk of sexual molestation across the country. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Well, a reminder of our top stories now. China has condemned the decision by the U.S. to shut down its consulate in Houston, Texas. The U.S. State Department says the reason is to protect American intellectual property and private information. But the Chinese Foreign Ministry says the real reason is politics. Ethiopia, Egypt and Sudan have agreed to give dialogue a chance in resolving the long-standing Nile Dam dispute. The hydropower plant project on the Blue Nile has caused deep divisions, but there is renewed optimism of a binding deal emerging. And the Kenyan government has issued new guidelines on the sale of alcohol in bars and restaurants. This is part of efforts to contain a recent surge in coronavirus infections, but many in the food and beverage industry are opposed to the new restrictions. That's a look at our top stories this hour. Let's now cross over to Uche for the latest in business.
Thanks, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Kenya's Peninah Mohammed, seen as an early front-runner to head the World Trade Organization. And prosecutors in Italy want former executives of Shell and Eni jailed over a bribery scandal in Nigeria.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Now, Kenya's Peninah Mohammed is emerging as a front-runner to replace Brazil's Roberto Azevedo as a Director General of the World Trade Organization. Now, delegates see Peninah alongside Nigeria's Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as favorites for the position as the U.S. and China remain locked in a trade war. The candidates must navigate a highly political process that ends on September 7th in order to take up that position. Here's CGTN's Daniela Pearson now looking at Peninah's speech.
Kenya's nominee for the post of Director General at the World Trade Organization, Peninah Mohammed. The 58-year-old minister has served as WTO ambassador, Kenya's Trade and Foreign Affairs Minister, and has chaired a WTO ministerial conference, making her a prime candidate for the position. She is also one of 3 female candidates and one of 2 from sub-Saharan Africa. However, she is banking on reform to succeed Brazil's Roberto Azevedo, who steps down at the end of August.
I think the rule book needs to be upgraded, and if it's not upgraded, issues will continue to occur. The negotiating function of WTO has faltered. We need to revive that so that members actually sitting in rooms discussing and negotiating. The WTO is the only organization that we have that actually can start with an initiation of a discussion to a negotiation of an agreement to a dispute settlement mechanism being in place to address any disputes that occur in the implementation of the rules. And so we need to upgrade the rule book, definitely. And we can only do that by negotiating.
She hopes to be the one to steer the World Trade Body out of crises from global trade tensions and rising protectionism. The United States has also paralyzed the WTO's appellate body by blocking new judges. She says the US has solid reasons to raise the concerns it raised.
I think for me, getting the AB back on its feet would be a priority, because we need, a multilateral system that everybody has confidence in and that everybody would like to use. We've used it before. All the, the big players have used it before very successfully. So we need to go back to that space where we can all have trust and confidence in a system that's based on the negotiated understanding. We have a dispute settlement understanding that was negotiated by members, and that's what we should use to reinstate the appellate body, so that the concerns that have been raised by countries can be dealt with, concerns of overreach.
Peninah also boasts of deep knowledge of the WTO system, but she must beat 7 other candidates in the weeks of campaigning that lie ahead. Some delegates say Mohammed and Nigeria's candidate are favourites to replace Azevedo.
The difference, I think, between me and them is that I have worked this system. I have worked it fully, and not just as a delegate, but as a chair of the different bodies. I have delivered as an ambassador in Geneva. I delivered an amendment to a major, treaty, and I delivered a decent package in Nairobi. I don't think any of them can claim that. They can't claim that, and that's why I believe that I can hit the ground running.
Over the past week, countries have been hosting Geneva cocktail parties to showcase candidates. The WTO eliminates them in batches, starting with those unlikely to win consensus from its 164 members. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Now, Italian prosecutors have asked for oil majors Eni and Shell to be fined and some of their present and former executives to be jailed in a trial over alleged corruption in Nigeria. Now, the prosecutors want current Eni CEO Claudio De Chazzi to be jailed for 8 years and Shell's former head of upstream, Malcolm Brinded, to be jailed for 7 years and 4 months. Eni and Shell should be fined just over $1 million each and just over $1 billion be confiscated from all the defendants in the case. Now, the amount should be equivalent to the bribes alleged to have been paid. It is one of the oil industry's biggest suspected scandals. The prosecutors allege that Eni and Shell acquired a Nigerian oil field back in 2011, knowing that most of the $1.3 billion purchase price would go to politicians in the country and, of course, middlemen in bribes. Meanwhile, China has positioned its Long March 5th rocket at the Wenchang Space Launch Center in southern Hainan province as it prepares to carry the Tianwen-1 mission to Mars. China's Space Administration says the launch can take place later this month or in early August. It also says it has completed work on 2 tracking and data relay satellites ahead of the probe. Now, scientists also say they are confident the Tianwen-1 is ready for liftoff after multiple system tests.
We have verified the interfaces between different systems and the flight program, and we have indicated that we are capable of conducting the country's first Mars mission. We developed a kinetic model that has the same orbit with the rover and corresponding measurement model. Then we established the control algorithm to ensure that the probe lands on the designated location at the designated time and can automatically capture information, so it can conduct flight and control missions across Mars.
Now, of course, human beings have observed Mars for thousands of years now. It has become one of the most explored planets in our solar system. But why are we still so fascinated by the red planet? Here's CGTN's Wule with more.
Many countries like the US, the UAE, China, and Russia are carrying out their own Mars exploration missions. Mars is one of the 8 planets in our solar system and is called the Earth's sister planet because the 2 planets have a lot in common. The red planet's diameter is about 53% of the Earth's one, and the mass is 14% of the Earth's mass. Mars also has diverse terrain, including mountains, plains, and canyons. And the most important thing is that water resources exist on both Earth and Mars. Scientists have found that a large part of the surface of Mars was filled with water billions of years ago. If the Earth is threatened by too much disasters, human beings may need to find another planet in the universe and explore whether it can be turned into a second Earth. Scientists say Mars is currently the only planet where humans have been able to detect past signs of life and imagine making future plans. Current Mars exploration missions are to study the Martian environment and search for life conditions to support human beings' sustainable development.
Meanwhile, China and Arab countries are eyeing deeper cooperation on the wider application of China's homegrown Beidou navigation satellite system. Now, the successful operation of the system in the Middle East has encouraged many Arab and African states to rely on this Chinese technology in a variety of fields. That include transport, energy, and agriculture as well. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi with the rest of the details.
The Director General of the Arab Information and Communication Technology Center noted that China is sharing its technology with Arab countries in Africa while increasing the services offered by the Beidou system.
The Beidou platform is a bridge between the People's Republic of China, the Arab region, and Africa. It facilitates strategic, scientific, and technological cooperation. It is a very efficient and successful system which uses the latest technology that China shares with humanity.
Nada Al-Abidi is the director of the Tunis-based Beidou Global Navigation Satellite System Center. She is also one of the experts at the China Arab States BDS GNSS Center.
The system offers many services through several activities like training and measurement. This is guaranteed thanks to the quality of the Beidou system, which helps Arab and African nations improve the performance of many sectors like agriculture, transport, disaster relief, as well as economic sectors.
The Tunisian expert added that the final Beidou satellite to complete the Chinese navigation network was built by the China Academy of Space Technology. The system is compatible with other major navigation systems around the world, such as the American GPS and Europe's Galileo system.
On June 23rd, the world witnessed an important event. China launched the Capstone satellite for the Beidou navigation, adding the final piece to a global network, providing positioning, timing, search and rescue services. Now the Arab world and Africa can benefit from all its services.
In April 2019, Tunisia hosted the second edition of the China Arab States BDS Cooperation Forum. This international event brought together more than 200 Chinese and Arab officials, experts and entrepreneurs. Tunisian authorities assert that the deployment of the Beidou program's third generation, or BDS-3 satellite network, has paved the way for a deeper cooperation between China, the Arab region and Africa. Experts believe in building an ambitious space Silk Road. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, that is all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, independent power producers in Ghana threaten to cut off supply to the government over unpaid debt. They, of course, supply the country close to half of its electricity. More on that coming up top of the hour. For now, it is back to you.
Thank you, Uche. And you're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. The splendor of the Samburu culture in Kenya and why spears are being abandoned for books.
When Isabel's son, Yanni, was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, she decided to open the association Colmea to offer a safe haven for children like him in Cape Verde. The association has become the face of intellectual disabilities in a country where stigma is rife.
Tem que concilia carosco e concilia vida de minha filho com a associação que funda com o objetivo de dar resposta àqueles outros mães quem te acredita matar ama seus filhos igual quem te ama e filho.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Samburu tribe of Kenya are well known for being proud of their indigenous culture and traditions. In our continuing special series, Tribes in Flux, we take a closer look at the Samburu and the quest of its warriors to replace peers with books.
Hiyo kuwa morani ni mambo ya culture. Umuhimu kuwa morani ni kama hero, no?
Pertama saya ninti, kuna tambi pun tambi nama komite na saya ninti. Ila baga na ya maki, na pikir na. Pertama kalau saya nego, ayo, meran meran, tapi kuna saya. Na saya nego orang buat meran kiara, ini dina pernah kiara pun yang kaya. No, dai sama yang gue. Enak, tuan gitu kan dulu.
Mara ya kwanza unakaa na familia hadi miaka 10 tuseme 15, 18, 6 hapo hivyo. Ukiwa sasa kijana kama hujatairiwa. Sasa ukishatairiwa unakuwa morani. So baada ya morani unakaa for another tuseme miaka 9 hivi ufikishe 28 ama 30. So ukifikisha hiyo miaka so una choose ile bibi ambaye sasa msichana unaoa rasmi. So unakuja sasa hiyo sawa hizi vitu zote unatoa chini unakuwa sasa mzee.
Jolo na bayo kule. Ogol meguri. Ngara. Iyi meguri. Iyi ko dala karne ne, ko daga doje to duwa. Doje ko jibo nyingo shek. Ko to iyi meguri tene na. Iyi ko dala karne ne, ko daga doje to duwa. Ita kini be jinga. Ita kini jinga. Ko la marne peye, tol marne tena taulo ta, tena bagita tonkang ne tuinang baki. Ne weti ru ya mo nyata kan nguji. Abelong kan amani kan nguji. Ni ngwaro to antini. Ne masa nyana ni ngwaro kila mtu kenye tini. Ni ngware mala sin tini nyo sanduku bana sanduku ata ndugu berianya ni ngware ni. Ni torati ni witina. Amu to nganya. Asi. Manukari pi. Manukari. Ya kai rapode ne ko wena tal ken walde. Ikala te walde ne peging ni te bertini. Asli ngware da. Da yunal gerti la ko chata mana. Ni ngware kenya ko. Ai nang ko turunga. Ngoroi. Ngoroi. Ina marra yo.
Ngumu sana Samburu waachane na culture. Najua wakiachana na culture mambo zingine zote sitapita na sio mzuri.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in sports, excitement grows as Liverpool